Well, to my panel now, and I'm also joined by the host of Trigger with Samara Gill, the journalist and commentator Sami Hamdi, British-Palestinian commentator Kieran Andrew, retired Lieutenant Colonel and IDF spokesman Jonathan Conrickers, and New York Post columnist and host of Podforce One, Miranda Devine. Well, Miranda, great to have you back on Uncensored. Interesting interview I had there with the Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel. What do you think of that question? I mean, again, I have to preface it by saying that nothing excuses the disgusting terror attack we saw in Bondi Beach. You're Australian. I'm sure you've felt very personally about this. Does anything that the Israeli government has done in the war in Gaza, do you think, been a contributing factor to the rising anti-Semitism around the world?
Well, I mean, this is what we hear, but honestly, I'm not going to entertain any excuses for terrorism. There is no excuse. And once you go down that track of saying, oh, well, they had it coming to them and it's their fault because their government, you are playing into the hands of the terrorists and rewarding them for the utter mayhem and bloodshed that destroyed a lovely party in Bondi Beach, killed a 10-year-old girl, killed, 14 other people at least, 15, I think, and has left Australia just reeling. I mean, that is the worst terrorist attack in Australia's history. And it's Sydney and Bondi Beach are just such peaceful places for a war a world away to come to the shores of Australia is beyond shocking, and you cannot excuse it in any way.
No, I completely agree with that. The complexity, of course, of the narrative around this attack is that many people reacted, as they always do when there's an attack by Islamist extremists, by saying, we've got to get all the Muslims out. This is the problem. It's about Islam as a religion. There's too many of them are radicalised. They hate the West. They want to kill everybody. And then we discover that the hero, who is one of the great heroes that I've ever seen in any situation ever, this guy, who just risks his life. And apparently his last words to the people he's with was, I think I'm going to die. Please tell my family I did this to save others, or something like that. Incredible. But goes and risks his life, gets shot repeatedly in the process, is thankfully, we think, going to be okay. He's in hospital. But he's not just an Australian hero, he's a global hero. And yet he's Ahmed al-Ahmed. He's came from Syria as an immigrant to Australia. He's a Muslim himself. And so, if you have a kick all the Muslims out view of this, well, what do you do about the hero who saved so many lives? Because he's the very type of immigrant from a Muslim country like Syria that many of those who espouse that view would say shouldn't have been allowed in Australia in the first place.
Yes, and that's really the wonderful silver lining on this story, is that the heroism of that man, and what a twist that he is Muslim. And it's, it's almost meant to be, so that sort of reflex reaction, which people often have after these terrorist attacks by Islamists, just is softened. And, Australia is a country of immigrants, the highest rate of immigration, in fact, in the world, except perhaps Canada. And there are lots of Muslims there. Australians know them in Sydney as their neighbours. This guy runs a fruit store. And they have good feelings towards them. And I think that Australians are sophisticated enough now to understand, and do understand, that the sort of fundamental Islam that is bred in radicalised mosques by radicalised imams and seeps in that toxin from the internet, is just as frightening to regular Muslims living in Sydney, going about their life, as it is to non-Muslims. Yeah. So I think that was a good part of the story, I think.
It was an amazing thing to watch, and already several $1 million I think have been raised in a GoFundMe for him, including by leading Jews in America like Bill Ackman, which is it's an amazing part of this story and a heartwarming part of a terrible, terrible atrocity. All right, Kieran Andreou, you listened there to the Deputy Foreign Minister, didn't really want to answer the question I was making, which I kept making sure she understood was not about any justification for the terror attack, but about whether the rising sentiment of anti-Semitism around the world, which is a terrible scourge on society and very threatening to the 15 million Jews who live on this planet, whether the actions of the Israeli government have made it more or less safe to be Jewish around the world. What do you think?
Well, first of all, listening to her was pretty difficult because the vast majority of what she said was a tissue of lies. But as to your specific point, look, I'd make two immediate points, Piers. Number one, responsibility for what happened, the heinous attack, it lies primarily with the two individuals, twisted, psychotic, anti-Semitic individuals who carried out that disgusting attack. Let's just say that right off the bat, because they are directly responsible for what happened. Then we move to the point you make about the state of Israel. What I would say is this, those of us who care about all life genuinely and equally, and those of us who have advocated for the rights of people in Gaza, the rights of Palestinians everywhere, and the right of people in Gaza to not suffer a genocide, have said for a very long time that there is a clear distinction between Jewishness and Zionism, that there is a clear distinction between Jewishness and the State of Israel, and that the State of Israel does not act on behalf of or speak on behalf of all Jews, by absolutely no means. It is the State of Israel and its outriders.
Well, do you mean the government? I mean, because if you say the State of Israel, that is the whole of Israel,
right?
Right. So I presume what you're saying is that whatever the current government is at any given time, a bit like the government in the UK or the government in America, doesn't necessarily represent more than a slight majority of the country, right? If they win an election, maybe nearly half the country votes against them. So is that what you're saying? Because when you say the State of Israel all the time, you could be implying all of Israel.
Well, OK, here we come to a distinction, Piers, because I watch your show regularly and I know that you often want to make the distinction between the government and the state, and that's fair enough. So I'm happy to say, for the context in this conversation, the government. But I would just point out to you, and maybe this is a conversation for another time, that the State of Israel has always been a settler colonial project, and that every government has always subscribed to the view that the Palestinians are a nuisance that need to be removed. But we can discuss that another time.
Wait, but Kieran, it's actually this mentality that you just put on display. It's this mentality that is not separating the people and the state as to why the terrorist attack happened.
I don't intend to interrupt you.
I
just want to finish my last point.
Okay.
Finish your point, then Samara can respond.
The State of Israel, or let's say the government of Israel, and successive governments of Israel, because I can find you evidence of every single government in Israel saying this, tries to conflate Judaism, Jewishness with Israel. And so when the government of Israel commits acts of genocide, of course, that then opens the ground, opens the space for psychotic, deranged anti-Semites to say, look, even the government of Israel is saying it. They are one and the same. We know they're not one and the same. But as I repeat my initial point, responsibility lies with the individuals who carried out this atrocity.
OK, Samara.
This type of attack doesn't just happen overnight. Australia was at a boiling point because of months, give it years, of unchecked anti-Semitism that was happening on the streets. The Prime Minister was remaining pretty silent about it until today. And this is now what's happened. You don't just grab a gun and start shooting Jews like fish in a barrel because you're a psycho and you just feel like it. This is sort of the amalgamation of a really dark and insidious Islamic extremism that has kind of come into Australia and started rotting it. I mean, I can't think of a more Australian place for something so un-Australian to happen. And it's just ridiculous that you would say, oh, there's no difference between the state and the people. That is precisely what has happened, where they have bunched the state and the people together, and now children are dead, Kieran.
Can I come back on that just briefly? I'm saying the opposite to you. I'm saying, first of all, that there is a clear distinction between the state of Israel, it is a state, and the individuals that maybe live in that state or identify as Israeli in the world or are Jewish. There is a distinction. Your point is that there is no distinction, that Zionism is Judaism and vice versa.
Zionism just means believing in the right for Israel to exist. I mean, I don't want to go over it again and again, but you keep acting as if it's some sort of
There's no right for a state to exist.
Well, let me go to somebody who's actually in the State of Israel, which is Jonathan Conricus. Jonathan, welcome back to Uncensored. Again, let's just make it clear that what happened was one of the most disgusting attacks in recent times on a group of people, including a Holocaust survivor, a 10-year-old girl, innocent Jews going about celebrating Hanukkah on a beach, on one of the safest beaches imaginable, in the middle of Bondi in Sydney. I've been there. It's a fun, happy, sun-kissed place that will now be forever scarred by what happened there. And they were just intent, this father and son pair of extremists, on killing as many innocent people as they could possibly kill. First of all, we've talked a lot in the last 2 years. What was your reaction on a personal level to what happened?
Yeah, hello again, Piers, and hello to my fellow panel members. I visited Bondi Beach for the first time a few months ago, and it was part of a speaking tour in Australia. I met with Jewish communities in, as you said very correctly, Melbourne and Sydney, and I spoke with politicians in Canberra. And when I interacted with Jews there, my impression was of people who knew that they were living in paradise, which I think modern Australia is. It's a beautiful country that works well. People are nice and friendly and respectful of others. But the Jews there, many of the Jews, not all of them, but many of the Jews told me that, listen, we feel exposed. We are afraid to have any external sign of Jewishness. We are afraid when we send our kids to the Jewish school, and we are concerned about our safety when we're out and about on the streets and when we are at synagogue. And one of the main reasons is because law enforcement, police officers, simply stopped doing their job, and politicians gave tailwind to extremists who were taking over the streets in Australia. And I'll remind everybody watching who's trying to whitewash Islamist terrorism that Palestinians, Hamas supporters, Muslims and other people were out chanting "Gas the Jews" in Sydney by the Opera building on October 8th. And that was before Israel had done anything in retaliation to the atrocities that Hamas perpetrated on October 7. And then those marches were allowed to continue every Sunday in Melbourne, in the local parliament office, and multiple times in various locations in Sydney and in various Jewish neighborhoods. There have been at least 20 attacks, hate crimes on Jewish locations in Australia. Most, if not all of them, have gone completely unanswered by the Australian authorities. And Jewish people, what they've been saying is, we are exposed. Our blood is now okay to be hunted. And yes, there's no empirical connection that proves that these two Islamists or these ISIS-inspired murderers, the son and father duo that murdered 15 people, that they were directly linked. But I think that the atmosphere matters. I think that when the Australian government goes ahead while Israel is fighting a war against Hamas and says, we are going to put our chips behind Hamas and draw a direct connection between October 7 and Palestinian statehood, and we are going to be virtue signaling that we are oh so benign, progressive and developed, and we are going to put our diplomatic support behind Hamas and the Palestinians. That is an enabler for terrorism. And I remember myself saying it in the Grand Synagogue of Sydney, and I remember speaking about it with Australian officials in Canberra, saying that, my dear fellow members of a democracy, you are creating a very problematic situation that is enabling and legalizing and allowing the killing or the targeting of your citizens. They are first and foremost Australians. They are loyal patriots. They pay their taxes. They're proud of their country. They love their country. And I think my response was, Sadly, I was not surprised. This was in the works, this was coming, and I think that Australian authorities have a lot to answer for.
Okay, Sami Hamdi, let me bring you in here. You know, there's a lot of people who think that there are from 1.5 to 2 billion Muslims, depending on what figures you want to believe, but obviously a massively larger number of Muslims in the world than the 15 million Jews, and that it doesn't take a big percentage of the Muslim population of the world to be radicalized against Jews and want to kill them all for it to become a very terrifying place quite quickly to be Jewish, the world, and a small place. What do we do about this? I mean, clearly this father and son, they've been in Australia, they don't appear to have sent too many red flags. The son apparently a few years ago hung out with some slightly dodgy people, but it certainly wasn't like he was running around with ISIS flags or anything. The father was part of a shooting club. He seemed to have assimilated pretty well. You know, it's not like it was an obvious thing. It may turn out that there were obvious red flags, but as things look at the moment, it doesn't appear to be glaringly obvious that they've been radicalized. What do we do here? What do you feel is the best way to try and stop this kind of radicalization where people just suddenly decide, I'm going to be ISIS and kill every Jew I can see?
Piers, thanks very much for having me. I think you've tried to bring the discussion to the crux of the issue. I think first and foremost, there's no justification for what happened. It's a heinous and disgusting crime that took place, and my thoughts and prayers go out to the families of the victims themselves. And I think that the question that you're asking is, are the events in Gaza influencing in any way whatsoever the rise in anti-Semitism and indeed the potential for these acts to take place?
Well, that's partly it. I mean, I would say that it's a double-pronged question. One is that, which is the current events of the last 2 years. Have they made it more or less safe to be Jewish around the world? But secondly, this was all going on for a long time before. I mean, ISIS and other groups like it were attacking and targeting Jews for several decades in this century. There's been a rising tide of anti-Semitism and violence against Jews in the last 20-odd years. So it's two-pronged. One, it was going on a long time before this, and has the war in a horrible way been a catalyst for it to be accelerated?
And I think that you've hit the nail on the head, particularly when you bring up ISIS, who've killed far more Muslims than any other religion on this earth, huge numbers of victims that were committed by ISIS. I remember when ISIS used to say that, oh, we're going to go towards Israel and the like, and there was this famous meme that said, okay, but you guys are in Iraq and Syria, Israel is that way, why'd you keep killing all these Muslims over here? The reason why I mention this is that when you look at the world as it is today, think about what everybody is seeing on their phones on a daily basis. They're seeing 6-year-old Sidra with her legs blown off, and the blast of the bomb means that her corpse is hanging on the wall inside Gaza itself. And then we have people coming out and saying, this is justified, this is a war, casualties happen in war. We see Hind Rajab, a 6-year-old girl who's in a car desperately calling for help, saying, I'm scared, my family around me are dead. The ambulance comes to rescue her, the Israelis bomb the ambulance, and she dies surrounded by the corpses of her family in the cold. You see Reem, a 5-year-old girl, being hugged by her grandfather, Ruh al-Ruh, the soul of my soul, and everybody is looking at these images one by one, and the destruction. And Shifa Hospital, where a certain ex-IDF spokesman goes in and makes up a video and tries to show that there is some sort of terrorism that is taking place and the like, that somehow justifies what's happening to the Palestinians themselves. And the reality is that, Piers, this does create... I didn't interrupt you. If you could give me some time just to speak. I've been waiting for a while to speak, my dear friend. You will have the ability to talk. You will have the right to talk. But if I could just finish. Piers, the image...
Jonathan, let him finish. Let him finish, please.
Piers, if you allow.
Yeah, but he's lying.
The images...
Okay, you can respond in a moment. Let him finish.
Not something I can condone.
Piers, if you don't mind, just 1 second. Jonathan, you will have time to speak, and you've been here many more times than I have. The reality is that when people are seeing all of these images in America, in Paris, in Berlin, and the like, and they're asking, Piers, they're saying, what crime did that child kill? You were with Tucker Carlson, Piers, the other day, who said to you, what crime did that child commit that she should be killed? What crime did the child, 6-year-old, who's now in Doha, have been evacuated from Gaza, who has 3 limbs blown off and has only 2 fingers left in her hand? What crime did she commit whereby she should have been bombed and been in this particular situation that she finds herself in? And when they turn on Piers Morgan Uncensored, and Piers, by the way, I will say, your tweet yesterday was phenomenal when you called him the Bondi hero, trying to cut the crossroads in which people were trying to stoke hatred and the like. But when people come on and they turn on the news and they find justifications for what's happening, they find people saying, listen, it is what it is, you just have to get over it. It's natural for hatred to fester in such hearts that results in a heightened sense of hatred, not just anti-Semitism, but Islamophobia and hate against people around the world. What was magnificent about what Ahmad al-Ahmad did, he rejected that hatred. He rejected that hatred that festered in people's hearts. He said, this is not the world I want to be part of. This is not the world as it should be. I believe in a better world, even if it is these wretched individuals who claim to be Muslim, who are shooting Jews who are innocently celebrating their Hanukkah. I reject a world where this is Muslim versus Jew. I believe in a world where there is genuine humanity, and now that is the video that's going viral. That's the video, Piers, that you spread. That's what you called him, the Bondi hero. He's given hope where the Israelis and the extremists on all religions were decimating that hope. When we see those images of those 80% of Gaza destroyed, Piers, and you're seeing it on the images and the UN resolutions keep getting vetoed. The ICC says arrest the war criminals, and we receive news that the British government wants to defund ICC because they won't remove the Netanyahu arrest warrant. Okay. The ICJ says there is a genocide. Piers, I'll just finish on this point. Piers, we're human. We have hearts. It doesn't matter what color or religion you are. When you see those images, Piers, do they not rip your heart out? Piers, do they not make you weep at what crime did this person commit that justifies this sort of destruction? And I will say this, I will not allow the tragedy of these innocent victims in Bondi Beach to be politicized. We should do them we do them a disservice. No, but you can actually,
you know what? You can weep as I did over the appalling scenes on October the 7th.
Of course. Piers, of course.
And you can weep at some of the...
And the civilian deaths, all of it condemned.
Let me finish. And you can weep over some of the appalling images of the suffering of the children in Gaza. And you can weep at the appalling images that came out from Bondi Beach. It's all appalling. But Miranda Devine, let me bring you back in here. This has been... I mean, for the whole of this century, really since 9/11, you know, I know you spent a lot of time in New York. And I was in New York about a week after 9/11, and I remember how traumatic that was for New Yorkers, for Americans. And then we had the war on terror with all the collateral fallout from that. And now we've got to this dark place where even somewhere like Bondi Beach becomes a massacre site. What's the answer to all this, do you think?
Well, I just look back on the last 2 years in Australia and the stories that I'm told by Jewish friends who no longer feel safe in Sydney, which was a safe haven for many Holocaust survivors and now their descendants. And they felt that they had a government that was playing footsies with the anti-Semites. And anti-Semitism is really Jew hatred, and hatred of anybody is terrible. And the government of Australia, because of its own cynical political electoral decisions, because many of their ministers rely on those electorates that are in southwest of Sydney that are mainly Muslim. And so for those reasons, they were loath to do the right thing and stand up for the Jews who were being spat on and assaulted and firebombed and graffitied. And, you know, as we were just saying, the memorial service a day after the October 7 atrocity in Israel, we had people invade it and say, gas the Jews, F the Jews, from the river to the sea, you know, globalise the Intifada. Well, they globalised the Intifada in Bondi Beach on the weekend, and that is not what Australians want. And I think that the government of Australia has been complicit because it has appeased the hatred, and you cannot do that. For instance, Anthony Albanese, the Prime Minister, he was asked and begged by Jews in Australia who were being attacked and fearful for their lives to have an envoy for anti-Semitism. Well, he did that, but he also at the same time put up an envoy for Islamophobia. It's not Islamophobia that is the problem. Islamophobia is a made-up term to try and soften the anger that people had against the Islamist attacks after 9/11. And many Australians were victims that day and in subsequent terrorist attacks. And yet Australia was still a very harmonious country. And you had people like our hero who lived happily among his neighbours and felt strongly enough that he wanted to go and risk his own life to save them. So that's the way Australia has been. Islamophobia is not a problem, and yet there we have the government appeasing a small amount of Jew haters. That's all we can call them.
Yeah, and I think Miranda, I remember after October the 7th, I remember either the Saturday or Sunday, so the day after or the 2 days after, walking down Kensington High Street in West London. And there was a mass crowd spilling out into the streets, several thousand people. And I assumed, because it was near the Israeli embassy, I assumed this was in support of the victims. It was the opposite. It was a pro-Palestinian march, but it was striking the number of pro-Hamas flags that were being brazenly waved around, the chanting that was going on. And I was really shocked to my core that was happening within 24 to 36 hours in a street near me in London. And that's why I think that those who say this has all been a reaction to what the Israeli government's done, that isn't true either. A lot of people were waiting for a catalyst to show how they really felt. And if you support Hamas, you just want to kill all the Jews. That's their mantra. Let me bring. I will come to you, Jonathan. But Kieran, you want to come in here?
Well, first of all, I want to say very directly to Jonathan, down the line from Tel Aviv there, Jonathan is a spokesperson for the IDF.
No, he's not anymore.
Well, he was a very senior spokesperson. Yeah,
but he hasn't been for quite some time.
IDF. It's irrelevant. It's relevant to what I'm saying.
It's not relevant whether he currently is or not.
He was a very senior...
Say what you want, I'm listening.
No, that's fine. I will, thank you.
Go on.
A very senior IDF spokesperson, which means that he has been directly responsible for many, many deaths and much murder of Palestinians, whether it was after October 7th or before. Because, by the way, and this relates to what I wanted to say, Piers, this conversation is in many ways astonishing. It's as if history began on October 7th. And I know that many people on this call would like that to be the case, but it's not the case. The reality is that Israel has been slowly destroying Palestine and Palestinian statehood and Palestinian life, much of it completely innocent, for almost 80 years. And so to have us here, I mean, I think there needs to be a bit of perspective. It's astonishing to me that we're trying to say that this unlinked psychopath, anti-Semite, and his son in Australia cruelly and abominably picking off Jewish people on Bondi Beach is somehow related to people waving Palestinian flags and opposing the genocide that Jonathan helped doctor the evidence of Al-Shifa's genocide.
I mean, look, Jonathan, I'll bring you in, but what I would say is, actually, it's not a massive leap, is it? If we tolerate on the streets of London and Sydney and New York, if we tolerate people supporting prescribed terror groups like Hamas, which a lot of them have been doing, if we tolerate that, you are sending a message to the world that that's okay.
Yes,
they're a prescribed terror group.
Yeah,
they are banned in this country.
I understand that. And I'm not here as
publicly supporting Hamas in this country is a criminal offence.
But Piers, OK, but you are doing mental gymnastics, with respect.
No, I'm not.
Well, you are in the sense that, first of all, I'm half Palestinian. I've never supported Hamas, never as any member of my family. And by the way, a point I always want to make to you, Piers, is, well, look what's happening in the West Bank. There's never been Hamas there. So the idea that it's all because October 7th happened and Hamas is clearly palpable nonsense.
All right.
But let me just briefly say, it is that the evidence that people on the streets of London and Sydney and other places are supporting Hamas en masse doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. There are the vast, overwhelming share of people showing up on the streets with Palestine flags are totally Jewish inclusive and anti-Zionist. And
Jonathan, come in.
Yeah, so I think we can cut through a lot of the lies and the allegations, and I think it's really ridiculous to blame me about anything. You try to normalize the terms here and to try to cement reality as if Israel has perpetrated any heinous crimes. That is nonsense. That's a blatant lie. It is just about.
Nobody believes that anymore.
As much of a lie.
Nobody believes you. You're talking to yourself.
I don't care what you think. I don't care what you think.
I know you don't.
I don't care what you think, and I didn't interrupt you. I didn't interrupt you while you were spewing your little nasty lies and whitewashing Hamas and Palestinian terrorists, and as you were spinning your tales of victimhood, of which Palestinians definitely are the best in the world. But I'll tell you something. I can understand your frustration, since you claim that you are half Palestinian. I don't know what the other half is, and frankly, it doesn't matter.
It's irrelevant, isn't it?
But since you say that you're half Palestinian, I can understand your frustration, because you and your forefathers had an opportunity to a state, and you and your forefathers missed that opportunity.
You don't lie convincingly.
And you and your people are the only ethnic group that have been given continuous chances time and time again to make peace, to end the conflict.
I've heard it all before.
What you and your people have done
knows that you're lying about the atrocities.
That is what you and your people have done. Israeli governments have offered Palestinians 4 peace deals. 4 times have Israeli prime ministers made serious proposals.
I heard they're paying you well. You're going to be out of energy by the end of this. We've heard this all before. It's a playbook. We know it.
Here's land, here's a capital, and let's end the conflict. And what have your representatives done? They have said, no, that isn't enough. We want it all. We want it from the river to the sea, and that is what you and your people continue to ask.
Okay, let me bring in Samara. Look, you were born in Melbourne. This is a very personal thing to have happened, I think, to everyone from Australia. It's a small country, only 27 million people, about a third of the size of the UK, and a 12th of the size of the United States. When you get an attack like this, it attacks the psyche of the country. When you talk to people back in Australia, what is the mood, you think?
Australia will never be the same, Piers, genuinely, after this. Look, I mean, anti-Semitism is rife. I'm with you. I don't think all Muslims should be deported tomorrow. But I think that we have, for too long, walked on eggshells around Islamist extremism. And unfortunately, yes, as Miranda says, it has turned up on the shores of Australia. Now, countries like the UAE, Jordan, Egypt, they don't put up with Islamist extremism. They shut it down and lock it up immediately. And the West...
These authoritarian regimes are your models.
They're not our models, but I'm saying
examples.
For too long, the West has pussyfooted around.
A democracy is supposed to follow Abu Dhabi. A democracy is supposed to follow Amman and supposed to follow Sisi in Cairo, who has thousands of people in his prisons, torturing them left, right, centre by Amnesty and Human Rights Watch. Mohammed bin Zayed, who's committing a genocide in Sudan. Mohammed bin Zayed, who's slaughtering in Sudan. Is your example. You've come to deal with British people. You've become deal with British people. You didn't call France, you didn't call Germany, you didn't call any of these European state democracies.
Because they are hardline on Islamist extremism.
Brutal regimes.
Before I came into the studio...
Let her answer, please.
Before I came into the studio, the FBI revealed that they have just foiled 4 plots of Islamist extremism that were planned for New Year's Eve in Los Angeles. This is an issue that is wrapping its ugly fingers around the West, and it's going to take over if we don't have a hardline approach to it. And the reason I don't mention Germany or France or any of those countries is because they also have a soft touch approach to it. And look what's happened there. It is not guns, as Anthony Albanese wants you to think, that have infiltrated this. We have the strictest gun laws, in some of the strictest gun laws in the world, actually. It is Islamist extremism that plows, cars into Christmas markets, that drives planes into buildings. That is what is rotting the West.
That is true. I mean, I don't think guns are irrelevant to this story, because he did have 6, the father.
Yeah.
And if it turns out, I mean, we have to wait for the investigation, but if it turns out that the son, they're trying to downplay this, but if he was already on the authorities' radar for associating with people who they've sort of been a bit vague about what they mean, but with, dodgy people, if it turns out those people were part of the radicalisation and his father had 6 firearms in a country where that is really difficult to do, then I don't think you can rule it out, because I always say Australia is a template for how to respond to mass shootings, actually.
Piers.
Because after, I mean, let me bring Miranda back in here, because you will know this, but, you know, it's interesting to me.
One comment about Albanese.
Well, one second. You know, the UK and Australia were once countries where everybody had a gun. I say this to my American friends, and I say it, you know, I waged my war with NRA. It didn't work, right? They don't want to hear from a Brit what they should do with their culture. It's down to Americans to work it out, and I respect that. But I do know that Australians and the Brits always used to all have guns, if you go back 150 years or whatever it is. And then we sort of gave them up. And so it's shocking when these things happen. When Dunblane happened in '96, around the same time as the Hobart massacre, both countries brought in draconian laws about guns. And it is surprising in this case, if there was any doubt about this boy, when he was 19, 20, potentially getting in with the wrong crowd, that his father had 6 guns. I mean, I don't think that's an irrelevant fact. What do you think?
Well, I mean, the draconian gun laws have certainly worked to keep guns out of the hands of law-abiding Australians. But the gangbangers and same people, the Islamist fundamentalists out in southwest Sydney, have plenty of guns. Just last month, a cop I know, sent me footage of an AK-47 gunfight, 50 rounds from an automatic weapon fired into a residential house. So the gangs have got, you know, it's like New York City.
There was only, in the last recorded figures, Miranda, there were only 31 gun murders in Australia between June 23 and June 24. That's the official Australian data on gun murders. In the same comparable period of the whole of 2023, according to the Pew researchers, there were 18,000 gun murders in America. And it's only 12 times the size. So America has 540 times the gun violence of Australia. And in fact, gun violence in Australia, like the UK, is negligible.
Well, I'll just say it's like New York City, where we have very strong gun laws. No one can have a gun, under easy circumstances. And yet there in the Bronx and in the outer burbs, you have gun battles and murders with guns going on all the time. So the fact that these terrorists on the weekend in Bondi happen to have 6 shotguns does not surprise me, because it's the criminals in Australia that now have guns.
Piers, can I just make a point here?
There was a
6-year-old boy called... Jonathan, just give me 1 second. There was a 6-year-old boy called Wadir in America. As a result of all that was being said coming out of Israel, his neighbor became so radicalized, took a knife and stabbed this boy 10 times and killed him. And the boy was in the arms of this individual. And he said, "Oh, Lord, what happened?" When they talk about Albanese being soft, Albanese kicked out a young senator called Fatima Payman, drove her out of the party because she called it a genocide and she called for the recognition of a Palestinian state. Albanese said, "There's no way I'm doing it," and he drove Fatima Payman out. Albanese ended up cancelling visas for pro-Palestinians who were coming, trying to show images of genocide to Australia at the whim of an Israeli Zionist lobby that was coming out and saying, "We don't want this in Australia." And when Albanese does all of that, we have 3 guests here who are now complaining that Albanese refuses to see to what the Israelis are doing. But the point that I want to make here is this.
Can I ask you a question about the genocide? And it's this. It's a tough, direct question. If Israel is waging a genuine genocide, that means they want the total elimination of all Palestinians. So far, they've killed 70,000 people in Gaza over a 2 and a bit year period.
According to Hamas.
Right? According to the Hamas Front Health Authority, whose numbers have previously been accepted by the Israeli government.
And
so let's put that
well
in context. But that is, out of a population of over 2 million, is a long way from eradicating a population. And yet they have the means to do it. That's why I've always quibbled with the use of the word genocide. Because if Israel's government was genuinely being genocidal, why wouldn't they kill everybody?
Can I just say just one thing?
Well, it's a simple question, but I've never heard a very convincing answer.
Sure, Piers. What Hitler did to the Jews is a genocide. What he did was a horrific Holocaust.
But he killed 6 million
Jews,
and 6 million more people.
But thankfully, he didn't kill all of them. Thankfully, there were many thousands that survived. Thankfully, there were many of those who managed to survive to tell the tale, to tell us never again, so that we would not be able to do it again. So it's almost irrelevant, the point about how many do they need to kill. Hitler didn't need to kill all of them for it to be a genocide. He didn't need to gas all of them to be a genocide. Kieran, here you go.
Just briefly before, no doubt Jonathan wants to come back in. And I do also, Piers, want to respond to what Jonathan said, since he felt bold enough to talk about my forefathers. But briefly, first of all, your definition is slightly off, Piers. It's not the eradication of an entire people. It's an attempt to eradicate them.
Well, not an attempt, an intent, not attempt.
An attempt, intent.
They're two different things.
Which the ICJ finds there's probable cause.
An attempt means you try and do something.
Which the ICJ finds there's probable cause.
Intent means
Let me just finish.
You are intent on actually annihilating a
Which
population.
is what the ICC and ICJ found.
No, there is no international court that has actually...
there's no intent.
The definition of
genocide.
The definition of genocide that legal scholars go by says is an attempt to eradicate a people in part or in whole. And of course, intent, Piers, you're right. Intent is a part of that. Now, there's plenty of intent, evidence of intent on the part of Israel's political class. We don't even need to go into that.
No, there isn't.
Oh, come off it, Jonathan. You are bad at lying, my friend. You need to go back to lying school.
There is propaganda,
Listen,
and there's nonsense, and there's whitewashing from people like you, but there's no evidence
and then
of
you
it.
can come back and tell all the porkies you like.
Yeah,
Let me
you
just
want to say this for half an hour now. You've been just saying for half an hour.
Jonathan,
yeah, sure.
notice,
go ahead,
everybody watching this, notice how Jonathan immediately tried to pivot away from the substance of the conversation, which is the atrocities in Australia, and immediately tried to make it about my homeland, my forefathers, all of that nonsense.
About it.
It's because he's trying to capitalise on these heinous murders in Australia, and I think it is nothing less than disgusting that you would come on air and try and do that. Shame on you. You're a very bad liar.
All right. Last word to Jonathan.
Yeah, right. Listen, you're not even worthy of a comment. But I think if we go back to the topic at hand of Islamist terrorism in Australia, I think we've been asking questions, some of them relevant, I think, but I think we should be listening to what's coming out of the Grand Mosque in Sydney and what main imams are saying and preaching on Fridays and in special sermons, and what they're saying to their believers.
They condemn Bondi categorically.
Some of them
say
are.
It, say
some
it.
Of them
They're
are.
condemning
Some
Bondi.
of them are not.
Say it.
Some
they
of
are condemning
them
Bondi. They are standing with their Jewish brethren.
Some of them are, and some of them very clearly are not.
Show us the evidence.
And if I'll just be allowed to finish a point here before you jump, I'll just want to make a point here, because I think this connects with us having a little bit more clarity and honesty about the situation. To be clear, I do not think that every Muslim is to blame for this. That's a ridiculous thing to say. I don't think that Muslims as a whole are a problem or the problem. I think that unchecked extremism, where local authorities are either too weak or too cowardly or too ignorant to recognize, that is the problem. And that's a problem that permeates in England, in Germany, in Sweden, in France, in Australia, in Canada, and in some parts of the US. It is the complete lack of understanding what extremist Islam is.
2 billion Muslims live in peace. 2 billion Muslims live in harmony. 2 billion Muslims live alongside Christians and the Jews. But Muslims did not commit the Holocaust. Muslims did not impose apartheid. Muslims didn't slaughter. Muslims didn't do the genocide in Rwanda. Muslims didn't do apartheid in South Africa. Muslims didn't commit the Holocaust. Muslims sent ships to Spain to bring Jews to safety when they were being slaughtered over there. After the Holocaust, Jews came to the Muslims in Palestine and said, don't do to us what Europe did. Be fair, Jonathan.
Okay, I've got to leave it there. Miranda, I know you've got to go. Keep writing your great columns. Must read in the New York Post whenever you drop. One of the best writers.
Piers.
One of the best writers in America. And I really appreciate you all joining me. Thank you very much.
Thank you.